The Forgotten Code. Chapter 1. The Discovery. It was a cold, rainy night when Ethan Hayes first stumbled upon the ancient artifact. The storm had been relentless, but that didn't stop him from continuing his search. As a seasoned archaeologist, he was used to pushing through harsh conditions. But tonight felt different. An unsettling energy lingered in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan's hands trembled as he dusted off the layers of dirt covering the object. His flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls of the cave. The artifact was no bigger than a human hand, made of an unfamiliar metal that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. Etched into its surface was an intricate pattern, a series of symbols and lines that looked almost like a language, though one he had never seen before. For weeks, Ethan had been following a trail of clues that led him to this hidden cave deep in the Peruvian mountains. He had hoped to find evidence of an ancient civilization, but this was something else entirely. The moment he touched the artifact, a surge of energy shot through his body. His vision blurred, and for a split second, it felt as if the world around him shifted. "Is this it?" he muttered under his breath. He quickly reached for his notebook, sketching the pattern before anything could be damaged. His heart raced with anticipation. Whatever this code was, it had been buried for centuries, maybe longer. And if the rumors were true, it held the power to change everything. But as Ethan stood there, the weight of his discovery sinking in, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was watching him. Suddenly, a noise echoed from the cave entrance. Footsteps. Ethan froze, his instincts screaming at him to hide the artifact. In the back of his mind, he knew he wasn't the only one looking for it. Slowly, he turned off his flashlight and crouched behind a large boulder, holding his breath. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be quiet. And they were getting closer. Ethan's grip tightened on the artifact as he heard a low voice speak in a language he didn't understand. Then, the sound of a gun being cocked. He had to get out. Now. What would you do if you uncovered a secret that could change the world? Stay tuned for the next chapter. Chapter 2. The chase begins. Ethan's heart pounded as he darted through the narrow cave tunnels, his mind racing. Behind him, the sound of footsteps echoed ominously, closing in with every second. He clutched the artifact tightly, its strange energy pulsing through his hand as he ran. The cave was a maze of winding paths, some leading to dead ends, others opening into wider chambers. Ethan had no time to think. He could only react, his survival instincts taking over. The sharp turns and uneven ground made his escape even more treacherous, but he had no choice. He couldn't let whoever was behind him get their hands on the artifact. He took a sharp right, his feet sliding slightly on the wet stone floor. The air was cold and damp, filling his lungs with a metallic taste. His flashlight barely cut through the darkness, flickering as if the very presence of the artifact was disrupting its battery. He gritted his teeth, pushing forward. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Ethan saw a glimpse of movement. A shadow, tall and looming, darted ahead of him, cutting off his escape route. He stopped abruptly, his mind scrambling for another way out. "Give it up, Hayes." A voice called out, its tone menacing. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Ethan's blood ran cold. They knew his name. Without thinking, he darted to the left, into a narrower tunnel that led deeper into the cave. He had no idea where it would take him, but right now, his only goal was to get away. As he ran, his thoughts raced back to the artifact in his hand. What was it really? And why were these people so desperate to get their hands on it? The tunnel began to slope downward, and Ethan struggled to keep his balance. His legs ached, but adrenaline kept him moving. He could hear the footsteps growing fainter behind him, but he knew better than to slow down. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a vast underground chamber. The ceiling stretched high above him, disappearing into darkness. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth from the roof of the cavern, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the space. Ethan paused for a moment, catching his breath, his eyes scanning the room for a way out. And then, he saw it, a narrow crack in the far wall, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. It wasn't much, but it was his only option. He sprinted toward the crack, but before he could reach it, a shot rang out, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet ricocheted off the stone wall just inches from his head. "Last warning, Hayes," the voice shouted. Ethan didn't look back. He dove for the crack in the wall, slipping through just as another shot rang out. The passage was tight, the rough stone scraping against his skin, but he pushed forward, his heart pounding in his ears. As he crawled through the narrow space, he could feel the artifact pulsing stronger now, as if it was reacting to the danger. It was almost as if it was trying to tell him something. But there was no time to figure it out. He had to keep moving. What would you risk for a secret that could change everything? Find out more in the next chapter. Chapter 3. The Hidden Agenda. Ethan emerged from the narrow crevice into another cavern, gasping for air. The adrenaline coursing through his veins kept him alert, but his muscles were screaming for rest. He glanced back at the crack in the wall, certain that his pursuers wouldn't be able to fit through the same passage. For now, he was safe. But for how long? His mind raced as he examined the artifact in his hands. The symbols on its surface seemed to shift subtly, almost as if they were alive. He had studied ancient scripts his entire career, but this was something different, something more advanced, yet primitive in its origins. Whoever had created this code, they had done so with an understanding of both time and power beyond anything Ethan could comprehend. His thoughts were interrupted by a vibration in his jacket pocket. His satellite phone. He pulled it out, the screen lighting up with an incoming call. It was Claire. "Ethan, where are you?" Claire's voice was sharp, filled with tension. "I found it," he said breathlessly. "The artifact. But I'm not alone." There was a brief silence on the other end. "They found you?" "Yeah," Ethan confirmed, glancing around the cavern. "Who are they, Claire? What do they want with this?" Claire hesitated before speaking again. "We need to talk. There's more going on than I originally told you. This isn't just about archaeology. It's bigger." Ethan's stomach nodded. He had suspected as much, but hearing it from Claire made it real. "What aren't you telling me? You remember when I told you about the organization funding our research? They're not just interested in history, Ethan. They're part of a global group, one that believes the artifact holds the key to controlling something much more dangerous." "Like what?" "Power. Unimaginable power," Claire replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a code hidden in that artifact, something that could unlock a weapon, one that could tip the balance of the world's power structure. That's why they're after you." Ethan's grip tightened on the artifact. "What kind of weapon?" "I don't know all the details," Claire admitted, "but from what I've gathered, it's ancient. Something created by a civilization lost to time. It's not just a tool of war, it's a game changer, Ethan. We need to make sure it never falls into the wrong hands." Ethan leaned back against the cold stone wall, the weight of the situation settling over him like a shroud. He had been so focused on the historical significance of the artifact that he hadn't considered its potential consequences. And now, it seemed the stakes were far higher than he had ever imagined. "Where do I go from here?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. "You need to get out of there," Claire said quickly. "I'm sending you coordinates to a safe house. There's someone there who can help you decode the artifact. But you have to hurry, Ethan. They're closing in on you." Before Ethan could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the phone, his mind spinning. Claire had been his trusted partner for years, and now she was revealing a web of secrets he hadn't even suspected. A global conspiracy, a weapon hidden in an ancient artifact, What had he gotten himself into? Suddenly, the cavern felt colder, more dangerous. The artifact seemed to pulse in his hand again, and this time Ethan could almost hear something, a faint hum, like a warning. He knew one thing for certain: he couldn't trust anyone. How far would you go to uncover the truth? Keep reading to see what Ethan does next. Chapter 4. The Betrayal. Ethan trudged through the winding paths of the mountain, the rain having stopped but leaving the terrain slick and treacherous. Every now and then, he glanced behind him, fully expecting to see shadows moving in the distance. But for now, the only sound was his heavy breathing and the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. He had memorized the coordinates Claire had sent him before the call was cut off. The safe house was only a few kilometers away, hidden in the dense forest beyond the mountains. He pushed himself forward, ignoring the exhaustion that threatened to overtake him. He needed answers he hoped the contact at the safe house could provide. As the forest canopy closed in around him, a rustling in the trees above caught his attention. He froze, his senses on high alert. For a moment, he thought it was just the wind, but then, a figure dropped silently from the trees and landed in front of him. Ethan staggered back, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife he kept strapped to his belt. The figure stood tall, dressed in black tactical gear, their face obscured by a mask. But it wasn't the stranger's appearance that unnerved Ethan, it was the emblem on their chest. The same emblem he had seen on documents tied to the mysterious organization Claire had mentioned. "Drop the artifact," the masked figure demanded, their voice cold and emotionless. Ethan's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, they took a step forward, reaching for the gun holstered at their side. "I said drop it." Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't let the artifact fall into their hands, but he was outmatched. Whoever this was, they weren't just a hired gun, they were a professional. And they weren't here to negotiate. Before Ethan could react, another figure emerged from the shadows. But this one, he recognized. Claire. She stepped forward, her eyes hard and unreadable. "Ethan," she said calmly, "give them the artifact. It's over." What happens when those you trust are the first to betray you? Get ready for the shocking twist in the next chapter. Chapter 5. The Code Revealed. Ethan stared at Claire, his mind reeling. For a moment, everything around him seemed to stop. The rustling leaves, the distant thunder, even the pulse of the artifact in his hand. It was as if time had frozen, and the weight of her betrayal crashed over him like a tidal wave. "Claire," he said, his voice low, barely controlled. "What the hell is going on?" Claire didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her hand outstretched toward the artifact, her expression unreadable. "Ethan, you don't understand. This was never about discovery. It was about control. I tried to protect you, but now there's no time. Give me the artifact, and I can still keep you safe." "Safe?" Ethan scoffed, backing up slowly, his eyes darting between Claire and the masked figure beside her. "You lied to me. All of this, our research, the funding, it was a setup." Claire exhaled sharply, as though trying to maintain her composure. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. The organization needed someone who could find the artifact, someone with your skills. But once they realized how close you were to uncovering the truth, things changed." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He had been nothing more than a pawn. And now, they were ready to sacrifice him for the artifact he held in his hands. The masked figure stepped forward, gun raised. "We don't have time for this. Give it to her, Hayes, or I'll take it from your dead body." Ethan's grip tightened on the artifact. He could feel the strange energy surging through it again, stronger this time, as though it was responding to the danger around him. His mind raced, searching for a way out, a plan, but there was none. Claire had betrayed him, and the organization was closing in. But then, something unexpected happened. The artifact, warm and pulsing in his hands, began to glow. Faint lines of light traced along the etched symbols, illuminating the darkness around them. Ethan felt a sharp jolt, as though the artifact was trying to communicate with him. And then, in a flash, the code became clear. He didn't understand how, but he could see the patterns, the ancient language flowing through his mind like a current of raw knowledge. He glanced at Claire, whose eyes widened in shock. "Ethan, don't." But it was too late. The code within the artifact began to unlock itself, shifting and transforming into a sequence Ethan could now read. It wasn't just a language, it was a key to something powerful, something beyond their comprehension. And as the knowledge flowed into him, he realized what the organization truly wanted. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a system, an ancient network of control, capable of rewriting the very fabric of reality. Ethan's heart pounded as the truth became clear. This artifact was a piece of a much larger puzzle, one that could either save humanity or plunge it into an era of chaos and tyranny. And now, he was the only one who understood it. The masked figure stepped forward again, but this time, Ethan wasn't afraid. He held the artifact close to his chest, its energy flowing through him, giving him a sense of purpose, of clarity. "No," Ethan said, his voice steady, filled with newfound resolve. "You're not taking it." Without warning, Ethan bolted toward the forest. Claire shouted his name, but he didn't stop. He weaved between the trees, his mind racing, the artifact glowing brighter with every step. Behind him, he heard the masked figure firing shots into the air, but it didn't matter now. He had unlocked the code. He knew the truth, and they would stop at nothing to get it back. What would you do if you held the key to everything? The final chapter awaits. Prepare for an unforgettable ending. Chapter 6. The Final Decision. Ethan crashed through the dense forest, his lungs burning as branches and leaves whipped at his face. The artifact in his hand continued to pulse, its strange light casting shadows on the ground as he ran. He could hear Claire and the masked figure behind him, their voices growing fainter as he sprinted deeper into the wilderness. But he knew they wouldn't give up easily. They would find him. And when they did, they wouldn't hesitate to kill him for what he now understood. The artifact wasn't just a tool or a weapon, it was a gate. A gateway to an ancient system designed by a lost civilization, capable of reshaping the world. With the right code, it could unlock untold power. But it could also destroy everything. And now, the weight of that choice fell on Ethan's shoulders. As he reached the edge of the forest, Ethan found himself standing at the top of a steep cliff. Below, the river roared as it cut through the valley, the water churning violently against the rocks. There was nowhere left to run. He turned, clutching the artifact tightly, and saw Claire emerge from the trees, her expression hard. "Ethan, don't do this," she called out, stepping closer. "We can still work together. You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand perfectly," Ethan shot back, his voice hoarse from running. "You're going to use this to control everything. You're going to rewrite the world, bend it to your will." Claire shook her head. "No, Ethan, we're going to save it. The world is broken, governments, economies, everything. This artifact can fix that. We can bring balance." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "At what cost?" The masked figure stepped out of the shadows, his gun raised again, but this time, Ethan didn't flinch. He stared down at the artifact, its light flickering, and felt the weight of the decision he had to make. If he destroyed it, the world might be spared from whatever power it held, but it would also mean losing the only chance to understand its true potential. If he kept it, there was no telling what the organization might do if they got their hands on it. It all came down to one choice. Ethan stepped closer to the cliff's edge, feeling the wind tugging at him. The river below roared, reminding him of the precariousness of the situation. Claire's voice was pleading now, her calm demeanor cracking. "Ethan, don't throw it away. We can make this right. He looked at her one last time, then down at the artifact. Its light flickered once more, as if sensing the moment of decision. Ethan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and he hurled the artifact into the river. Time seemed to slow as the artifact spun through the air, its light dimming as it descended. Claire screamed, the masked figure lunged forward, but it was too late. The artifact hit the water with a final, muted splash, sinking beneath the surface and disappearing into the depths below. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the wind picked up, the forest rustling as if in approval. Ethan stood at the cliff's edge, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. It was over. Claire stared at him, fury and disbelief etched on her face. "You've doomed us all," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Ethan said, turning away from her. "I saved us." And with that, he walked into the forest, disappearing into the shadows, leaving the artifact and its power behind. The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.